I'm Brett Freedman. Senior Director for Emerging Technology for ICIT. And I believe this is the last session of the day. So I'm going to do something, I'm going to start with a confession. I spent years in government. I sat in rooms where we talked about autonomous systems, drone threats, AI-enabled warfare, the policy frameworks that were supposed to govern all of it. And I noticed something. The technology kept moving. It moved quicker and quicker. The frameworks, nearly without exception, simply did not. And that's true for the law as well. Last week, the House Armed Services Committee reported out its NDAA for FY27, and the White House issued its National Security Policy Memorandum 11, directing the accelerated adoption of AI across the national security enterprise. Lots to discuss in this space. Before further ado, I am pleased and honored to be joined here by Michael Robbins, who is President and CEO of AUVSI, the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International, which is the definitive industry voice for drones, robotics, and autonomous systems in both the commercial and defense sectors. He's a Navy Reserve officer, a veteran staffer of Capitol Hill with Representative Dingell, and the person who most recently stood before Congress and argued that this industry is ready to scale. AUVSI is the world's largest trade association for autonomous systems. For much of the past year, Michael has watched this industry grow faster than the regulatory structures designed to contain it. So with that, Michael, and with the NISPOM, as is commonly put, 11, I'm curious about things, kind of that disconnect between timing and where we are in terms of where we are in the movie in terms of adoption. So the document talks about accelerating AI adoption, assurance, accountability, the chain of command. Incidentally, it also drops a 90-day mandate to update what is called 3000.09, which is the directive that's governed lethal autonomy since 2012. Yesterday, we got wind that for the first time in my understanding, an autonomous sea-bound vehicle rescued 2 pilots who were shot down by an Iranian drone. Still inconclusive, but the belief is that it was a direct takedown. Think about that. 2 individual sailors sitting in the middle of the ocean, in the darkness, and an autonomous ship pops up and rescues you. I think this is the first time this happened, and it's only going to accelerate as these systems become integrated into where we are. So, Michael, with all that as a backdrop, and appreciate your taking the time here, from where you sit, do you believe that first off, the executive order and then the NISPOM 11 represent a serious deadline or just a means to produce another policy document?
Sure. First, thank you very much for having me, Brad and Corey and team, and thank you all for being here. I think the desire for the intent to be 90 days is ambitious, but I think it's sincere in that there is a desire to see policy move forward faster. This has been a consistent theme we've had in this administration, where they set very ambitious goals, including a number of which were in the Unleashing American Drone Dominance Executive Order, which was just over a year ago, June 6th of last year. Some of those goals have been achieved, many have not, and we actually put out a sort of scorecard last week on that. So I think there is definitely a desire at the executive level to see policy move faster because there's recognition that the United States is behind in a lot of ways. I think we're very much leading in terms of software innovation. The last panel, I'm sure many panels today have talked about America's lead in frontier AI models and a lot of other areas, but we're behind in many other areas as well, including many of which you touched on, certainly in terms of scaling manufacturing on the hardware side, and certainly in terms of developing a lot of the tactics, training, procedures, standards and such around integration of autonomous systems for both commercial and defense. As it relates to specifically the NESPER, I think the reality is drones are the future of warfare. I mean, robots don't bleed, as we saw yesterday. They extend operational reach by rescuing sailors, and we're very proud of that AUVSI member company, Saronic, for being part of that mission. But they also are going to be used for lethal strike by the United States at some point soon. Drones are the #1 cause of lethality in the Russia-Ukraine war on both sides. And right now, we are using drones, but in a very controlled fashion. In order to truly scale in terms of new modern warfare tactics, we don't have enough people to control the number of systems we're going to need for the future of warfare. We also don't have enough systems yet. But as we're integrating more and more systems, we need to reduce the cognitive load on the warfighter, which is where I think that policy really comes into play here. 90 days is ambitious, but I think that is driving towards that very ambitious goal of moving towards more lethality. Also, like the whole Anthropic debate plays into this as well, because as you probably know, part of the reason that Anthropic and the Department of War came to the situation they're in today is because Anthropic's terms of service were explicit on their system, their software will not be used for autonomous strike. And that was something the Department of War wanted to remove, but Anthropic felt that our software isn't ready for that yet. It will be one day, but at this point, and this was February, March of this year, not yet ready for that. The administration disagreed with that. Like from a policy perspective, they wanted to at least have that ability. So I think that factors into this as well, which is why I think you're seeing U.S. policy trying to accelerate to then bring industry along with it.
That's a good point. And I think at least it's been a policy that we've had to deal with for many years. It's been in existence, and now maybe just the update itself is something that is doable or achievable within those 90 days. We'll see. But to top off on your question as it relates to kind of autonomous systems and lethal, right now the policy requires appropriate levels of human judgment over the use of force. That's deliberately ambiguous. It's been for over a decade. The new NISPOM 11 says the update should ensure that AI systems, quote, respect the chain of command and operational authorities, end quote. My question is that the same thing? Because I'm not sure that it is, and I think in particular the CISOs in this room are going to be living with whatever answer ultimately comes out of that 90-day process, because it's going to extend beyond, right, the intent, the initial application.
I'm not a lawyer. I know you are.
Play one.
I don't want to do that because I think these ambiguous terms lead to a lot of legal questions and a lot of questions around authority and liability that are important to get right, but that ambiguous language, like you just said, leaves a lot open to interpretation, which may be purposeful at the moment, that may be the intent, but I think in the short term it leaves a lot of open questions. I will say from a technology perspective, I think to my earlier point on Anthropic's concerns, I have seen other demonstrations from some of our member companies, particularly in the use of smaller like FPVs, first-person view drones, Group 1, Group 2 sort of strike drones, even some larger ones, where they have evolved to a point where they're now being used on the battlefield by the Ukrainians. Like it is a mix of Ukrainian software and sometimes U.S. or German-based software. I say U.S. because it's actually not U.S.-based because we are not allowed to export that technology. So it's U.S. companies that set up affiliates in Europe to be able to design it there and give it to the Ukrainians or sell it to the Ukrainians because we actually can't export that, which is a whole other conversation. But like, part of the reason I think it's ambiguous is because there's culture pushback within the legal community, within the JAG community, within the Pentagon as a whole, but it's happening now from companies that are within our membership that are designing software here in the U.S. And I think there's recognition that we have to evolve. And that may bring some folks kicking and screaming along. But if the balloon goes up and we go to war tomorrow, which I hope we don't, because that means I'm getting activated and going away, and I like my job. We won't be relying upon policy that's antiquated, because our back will be against the wall and things will change very quickly. And it's better to prepare for that now than when our back is against the wall.
And by the way, just as a useful fallback for me, I always just can say it depends from the legal side of things.
Thanks for that.
As a get out of jail free card. But you were mentioning the Ukrainian instance, right? We're hard to believe, but it's almost about 2.5 years of drone warfare in Ukraine. They've rewritten the tactical playbook. They're iterating almost on an hourly basis, if not more frequently. First-person view drones, as you mentioned, FPVs, swarms, counter-drone systems evolving day to day. What do you think that the defense and the commercial industry particularly have learned from that conflict? And do you believe, and this plays into what we were speaking of with regards to drone dominance and a lot of the policies that I think are now starting to see or come to see fruition, about the acquisition system moving fast enough before these types of drones are obsolete and the technology has already moved to the next thing?
Yeah, there's a lot there. And we don't have enough time to get into it.
In 1 minute.
But yeah. So your last piece on acquisition, I mean, there's some really excellent reforms taking place at a pace that is impressive by Pentagon standards, but still probably not impressive by like global standards, to more rapidly integrate technology faster. In particular, the Drone Dominance Program, which is a Department of War level program being led out of the Defense Innovation Unit, is going through a series of what they call gauntlets, where they've put out an advanced market commitment, which is a policy proposal that AUVSI developed with the Department of War for this, where they tell industry in advance, this is how many drones we're going to buy, this is the price that we would like to pay for it, this is when we want delivery, and we will pay you upon delivery. So it's giving a clear signal to industry to like, this is what you have to achieve. You have to be able to produce this many of drones. And they also give them the standards for the components. Like this is the minimum standard we want, and this is the max. This is what we really, really want as it relates to like decoupling from China and using non-PRC components. So it really has given a lot of clarity to industry. And then industry has to actually compete. Their kit actually has to work. They go out into the field and actually have to fly the missions. And the number one point in which they're rated on is from the warfighter, do you want to take this drone to war? And that is a completely new way of doing things in the acquisition world. It's causing a lot of disruption from like the traditional acquisition folks, because you see this as sort of a threat to their way of doing business from the traditional program of record. But it's absolutely necessary, because the way things work now is by the time a requirement is written, yet alone put out for an RFI and then down selected and acquired, just by the time the requirement's written, it's obsolete. So there has to be this rapid iteration cycle, and we've learned that from Ukraine. Is that like the technology has to be constantly evolving. You cannot get inventor lock. I was with a number of Ukrainians last week. They have an 80-20 rule. 80% of all of their spend is on proven technology, and 20% of their spend is on iterating new technology. It may not work, but they are willing to accept that failure in terms of like getting new kit out to constantly be iterating, constantly evolving. And then of the 80% they're buying, it's not static. It's evolving as well with software updates, hardware updates. And the other 20% is like completely new companies. It injects new competition. So I think that's the way we have to kind of evolve. It's going to take time. The defense acquisition core, like the Pentagon Defense Acquisition, is bigger than the Marine Corps. Like it is a institution, and it is, it's broken in a lot of ways, and reforms have not worked. General Mattis has talked often about you can't reform defense acquisition. Like it's just too big, too many people have failed and tried, so you got to go around it. And that's what we're doing with the DDP program. That's very limited. It's focused on FPVs, but the concept, if it works, which is working so far, but ultimately it works, we can replicate it. We can use it for unmanned surface boats. We can use it for counter drone technology. We can use it for larger drones. We can use it for all different types of defense technologies. We're really excited about this new program.
Right. So I think that gets straight to you were mentioning the Chinese issue and supply chain. So you've been sounding the alarm on Chinese supply chain dependence in the drone sector before it was fashionable.
Right.
The U.S. recently, as recent as, in policy, back the FCC in December.
December 22nd.
Not that that's etched in your brain, decided that DJI is a national security threat, not only them, but also other producers. The FCC therefore moved, the NDA moved, Green UAS exists, but DJI still holds about 70% of the commercial drone market, and the domestic alternatives are more costly, less capable, or simply just don't exist at the moment. So is the drone industry ready to fill or are we banning DJI with one hand and trying to find a domestic alternative with the other, because trusted supply chain is not the same as available supply chain?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a hard problem. But we believe firmly that the only way to succeed against a state-sponsored company like DJI, where they're not competing on a level playing field, they have received massive state subsidies and carry very real national security risks, is both offensive and defensive tactics, defensive, offensive policies. On the defensive side, moving to restrict DJI was long overdue. They had captured 80% of the global market, 90% of the U.S. market, with low-cost subsidized drones that have very verified national security risk. That's not me saying that. That's multiple U.S. government agencies and both classified and unclassified reports. So that was a known risk for many years. And it's not unique to drones. It's true of many things, but it's perhaps more troublesome with any kind of robotic system because it moves. And when something moves, it can actually physically disrupt and has persistent surveillance concerns. So I think banning DJI is the right thing to do. From an economic perspective, you're not wrong that alternative systems from the United States are more expensive. But the reason for that is twofold. One, we haven't received subsidies the way Chinese drone makers have. And two, they've never been able to achieve any kind of economies of scale because their market share was so limited. So Wright's Law never had an opportunity to kick in because you're buying components in such small numbers, producing in such small numbers, that your costs remain very high. So now as you start to remove the subsidized competitor from the playing field due to verified national security risks, that provides market opportunity for other companies to come in and compete. And as they start to win market share, their cost will come down as they start to achieve those economies of scale they'd never been able to achieve before. And we're already seeing that happen with a number of drone companies that have very capable systems across very different types of and diverse markets, because one drone is not necessarily appropriate for all mission types. It's a very diverse market set with very diverse mission sets. We're seeing companies step into that and fill that void right now. Now, where there's still a very real challenge is that the way the FCC approached the drone ban, in our view, was a hammer when we asked for a scalpel. And what we were specifically seeking, and what Congress actually pushed the FCC to do through legislation, was to restrict based on verified national security concerns. So that was going to target the PRC drone companies. Instead, what they did is they banned all foreign drones and all foreign drone components. That's again taking a hammer when we asked for a scalpel. It didn't make any sense. So I believe very firmly, we have an eye at the end of AUVSI for international, that democratic nations and democratic companies are stronger when working together, because we know authoritarian nations are working together to undermine democracy. So democracies have to work together to safeguard democracy, and we should be working with countries like our allies in Europe, Israel, Australia, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, like as part of a broader drone ecosystem. That's how we're going to achieve affordable scale. That's how we're going to compete against authoritarian China for both commercial and military use cases. The FCC's made that a lot harder. They are offering some exemptions. There is a waiver process, including using our Green UAS cybersecurity and supply chain review process. But I would much prefer to have had just a targeted review of and restriction on those that actually carry national security risk versus all foreign drone and drone components.
Agree, and that day is also etched in my memory. I think, let me turn to an acronym that just falls off the tongue. BVLOS, Beyond Visual Line of Sight, because everything needs an acronym, and what that refers to is drones that are beyond where you can see them, but they are operating. It's the regulatory unlock that the commercial industry was waiting for, right? And the FAA proposed rule is out. You've called it a catalyst. My concern is that we're trying to write permanent rules for a technology that's changing faster than the rulemaking cycle, which is antiquated, lengthy, and mired in a lot of bureaucracy. Are we building the right framework, or are you worried, at least, that we're going to spend 5 years getting BVLOS right, and then wake up to find the problem is now drone swarms over critical infrastructure, or something different than what we were anticipating?
Yeah, I think it's a very real concern. And based upon the draft rule that came out last year, the end of July, we would be in more of a regulatory lock that would be actually a significant setback for the industry. So we had a lot of comments on the draft rule, the notice of proposed rulemaking, and we're hopeful that the final rule, which we understand is in the White House review process, OIRA review process now, that when it comes out, hopefully the next few weeks, It will be a performance-based rule, a risk-based rule that allows for industry to continue to innovate and allows for technology to continue to evolve by setting broad performance standards that then industry can operate in that box. We think that's the right way to regulate, not putting very prescriptive regulations on a technology that, as you noted, is evolving very, very fast. So we've had a number of very constructive engagements with the FAA. DOT Secretary himself has personally engaged on this a number of times. The administrator has been very involved, the deputy administrator. They really do seem to get it. The draft rule had a lot of flaws. It didn't take into account all the regulatory progress that's been made in lieu of there being a final rule as we wait for the BVLOS rule, or Part 108 is what it's called. The FAA has actually allowed thousands of operations to take place beyond visual line of sight throughout the United States for different types of mission sets over the last couple of years by giving a waiver to the existing Part 107 rule to allow for BVLOS flights to occur. So for drone delivery, you probably see like Walmart doing drone delivery, UPS, Wing, Zipline, Amazon, but then also for, that's like on the commercial side, but also for important public safety missions as well, for search and rescue, disaster response, 911 response, and then for critical infrastructure inspection and other important missions. So literally thousands of these missions are taking place every day through an exemption and waiver from the rule. All of those exemptions and waivers were not taken into account in the draft rule. It was sort of taking the industry back a couple of years and wiping out all those waivers and exemptions, instead of taking all of those lessons learned and incorporating that into the rule. That was our biggest piece of feedback to the FAA, is like, don't wipe out all the progress that you have made as a regulatory agency. You've leaned forward and embraced technology. Incorporate all of that so that industry continue to move forward, not take a step back to then move forward.
And hopefully the final rule accomplishes that. So I'll give you a layup as the last question of the day here. The history of American security policy isn't pretty when it comes to anticipating threats. We got the warning signs on 9/11. We watched the drone threat mature in conflict zones overseas for years before it showed up over critical infrastructure here at home or military bases. The pattern is consistent. We see the threat, we debate it, we study it, and then something oftentimes bad happens, and we spend the next 18 months passing legislation named after that event. So here's my question. Are we capable of getting this right before a catastrophic autonomous systems attack forces our hand? Or are we waiting for a drone to take down a power grid, just simply inadvertently spread white powder, even if it's inert, do something at a World Cup game before Congress can generate the political will to act with urgency? And if the answer is that we need the shock, which, in some instances that's what I get back to, then we should say so, because that's an important thing for the people in the room to hear.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're here in Congress, which I think by any measure is a broken institution. Their inability to actually legislate and address problems, as Brett said, sort of before they become a crisis, is challenged. That said, last December, as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, Congress did adopt the Safer Skies Act, which begins to set the regulatory framework for state and local law enforcement to be trained and deputized to be able to use counter-UAS detection and mitigation equipment to protect critical infrastructure, to protect World Cup sites, to protect America 250 sites, and things of that nature. Does it go far enough? Absolutely not. Is it a step in the right direction? It is. So that's occurring now. Unfortunately, it didn't pass till December, which means the rules are kind of being written now as we prepare for the World Cup, which starts tomorrow. The FBI Training Center down in Huntsville has been graduating classes of state and local law enforcement as quickly as they can every 3 weeks to get people trained up. The FBI, Department of Justice, TSA, all of those that are already trained and have some familiarity with this are going to be working a lot of overtime over the next couple of months as we go through a summer of lots of Tier 1 events. Do I think we are ready? I don't. I think we're a lot more prepared than we were 6 months ago. About a year ago, I testified before Congress on this, and what I said to them was, if an incident happens, like Brett talked about, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing. Every agency, everyone's going to, and as again, Congress, when you point fingers, hold up a mirror, because you are going to be responsible for this. You need to look yourself in the mirror and say, did we do enough? And the answer is absolutely not, because the authorities were restricted by Congress. Like what the executive agencies could do, what state and local authorities could do, were limited by Congress for years. So finally, that extension, sort of limited in nature, but an extension did happen in December. It's a big step forward. It's not the giant leap forward we needed, but I think we're going into the World Cup, starting tomorrow, again, better prepared than we certainly would have been 6 months ago if the Safer Skies Act hadn't passed.
Thank you, Michael. And I think, you know, taking a look back, and we're both creatures having worked here, they're human beings, right? So that the aspect of being reactionary is natural. And the difficulty of putting resources, taxpayer dollars, to something that hasn't manifested is not easy, right? It takes political will and it takes bipartisanship, and that's something that is in short supply at the present time, but hopefully that changes. I know that we're at time. Thankfully, Maggie didn't come to say that she's a part of a broken institution, but no, this is...
They know how I feel.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree.
I think she would agree.
Yeah, I think you're right. But please join me in thanking Michael for taking the time to be with us today, and hopefully it was a good conversation.